The morning sunlight streamed through my kitchen window as I sat with my coffee, staring at my phone in complete disbelief. 3 more friends had canceled plans with me this week, each with increasingly distant excuses. Margaret Hall, that's me, and at 63 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable. But nothing had prepared me for what I was starting to suspect about my own daughter. If you enjoy dramatic life stories like this one, smash that like button and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. Because what unfolded in my quiet suburban home over the next few weeks would shake the very foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Margaret Hall. I'm 63 years old, and I've always prided myself on maintaining strong friendships. After retiring from my job as a school administrator 2 years ago, my social connections had become even more precious to me. My cozy 2-story home had always been the gathering place for book clubs, coffee dates, and weekend barbecues. The living room, decorated with family photos and comfortable furniture collected over decades of marriage, had witnessed countless conversations and shared memories with the women I considered my closest friends. But lately, something felt terribly wrong. Phone calls weren't being returned. Invitations were politely declined. Even casual encounters at the grocery store felt strained and awkward. My daughter Jessica, 38 years old and recently divorced, had been living with me for the past 6 months while she got back on her feet. Jessica worked as a marketing coordinator for a local real estate company, and I'd been so proud of how she was rebuilding her life after her marriage ended. She was beautiful, articulate, and had always been the apple of my eye. Perhaps that's why it took me so long to see what was really happening. My son, David Hall, 41, and happily married with 2 teenagers, lived across town but visited regularly for Sunday dinners. David worked as an accountant and had always been the steady, reliable one in the family. He'd expressed some concerns about Jessica moving back home, worried that it might be too much for me, but I'd brushed off his worries. Family helps family, I'd told him. That's what we do. My closest friend and neighbor, Patricia Chen, lived just 2 houses down and had been my confidant for over 15 years. Patricia, a retired nurse who'd moved to the neighborhood around the same time I did, had always been the person I could count on for honest advice and genuine support. We'd weathered job changes, family crises, and the normal ups and downs of life together. She had a practical nature and a kind heart that made her the perfect sounding board for life's complications. The first real sign that something was seriously wrong came on a Tuesday morning when I ran into Linda Morrison at the post office. Linda and I had been in the same book club for 8 years, and she'd always greeted me with warm hugs and enthusiastic chatter about our latest read. But that day, she barely made eye contact, mumbled a quick hello, and practically fled to her car. The interaction left me feeling confused and hurt. That evening, I mentioned the encounter to Jessica as we sat in the living room after dinner. She was curled up on the sofa with her laptop, supposedly working on a presentation for work, but I noticed she seemed to tense up when I brought up Linda's strange behavior. "Maybe she's just going through something personal, Mom," Jessica said without looking up from her screen. "You know how people get when they're dealing with their own problems." Her response seemed reasonable enough, but something in her tone struck me as odd. There was a dismissiveness there that didn't match the concern I would have expected from someone who knew how much my friendships meant to me. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to the patterns. Carol from book club had stopped responding to my texts about meeting locations. Susan, who I'd had coffee with every Thursday for 3 years, suddenly had a packed schedule every time I suggested getting together. Even my walking group seemed to be meeting without me, something I discovered when I saw them heading down the street while I was watering my front garden. I decided to confide in Patricia, knowing she would give me her honest perspective on the situation. We met in her backyard on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, sitting in the shade of her old oak tree with glasses of iced tea. "Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I began, setting down my glass and looking directly at my friend. Have I done something to offend people? My friends seem to be avoiding me, and I can't figure out what's going on. Patricia's expression grew serious, and she was quiet for a long moment before responding. Margaret, I've been wondering if I should say something to you about this. I've heard some things, and I wasn't sure if they were true or if I should get involved. My heart sank. What kind of things? Well, apparently you've been saying some pretty harsh things about various people in our circle. Critical comments about their marriages, their children, their choices. The stories are very specific, and they're coming from multiple sources. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Patricia, I swear to you, I haven't said anything like that about anyone. I don't understand where this is coming from. The concern in Patricia's eyes told me she believed me, but it also told me that the situation was worse than I'd imagined. Someone was actively spreading lies about me, destroying relationships I'd spent years building. But who would do such a thing, and why? That night, I lay awake thinking about every conversation, every interaction, trying to piece together when this campaign against me might have started. The timing seemed to coincide with Jessica moving back home, but surely that was just a coincidence. My own daughter wouldn't sabotage my friendships. The idea was unthinkable. But as I replayed conversations and incidents from the past few months, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Jessica always seemed to know details about my friends' personal lives that I didn't remember sharing with her. She'd make casual comments about book club drama that I hadn't mentioned. She seemed particularly interested in my phone conversations and would often linger nearby when I was talking to friends. The next morning, I decided to do a little investigating of my own. I called Carol directly, something I probably should have done weeks earlier instead of just texting. Carol, it's Margaret. I was hoping we could talk. I feel like there's been some kind of misunderstanding between us. There was a long pause before Carol responded, and when she did, her voice was cool and distant. Margaret, I think it's probably best if we take a break from book club discussions for a while. Some of the things you've said about the group have been really hurtful, and several of us feel like we need some space. Carol, please, can you tell me specifically what you think I said? Because I honestly have no idea what you're referring to. Another pause. Jessica told Linda that you think our book choices are juvenile and that you're embarrassed to be associated with our discussions. She said you called Carol's house tacky and that you think Susan's drinking problem is getting out of hand. My blood ran cold. I had never said any of those things. In fact, I loved our book club, had always admired Carol's decorating style, and while Susan did enjoy her wine, I'd never considered it problematic or discussed it with anyone. Carol, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I never said any of those things. Not to Jessica, not to anyone. Someone is lying about me, and I think I'm starting to understand who. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mixture of heartbreak and growing anger. My own daughter, the child I'd raised and loved and welcomed back into my home during her time of need, had been systematically destroying my friendships with elaborate lies. But why would she do such a thing? I needed to talk to David about this before I confronted Jessica directly. As the steady, rational member of the family, he might have insights into Jessica's behavior that I was missing. Plus, I needed someone in my corner who could help me figure out how to handle this devastating betrayal. But what I discovered next, suddenly, the pieces aligned. When I called David at work that afternoon, I could hear the familiar sounds of his office in the background. The hum of computers, muffled conversations from the hallway. I'd always found those sounds comforting, a reminder of the steady, predictable world he inhabited. Today, I needed that stability more than ever. "David, I need to talk to you about something serious. Can you come home early today?" His voice immediately shifted to concern. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine physically, but I've discovered something about Jessica that I think you need to know before I confront her about it." There was a pause, and I could almost hear him thinking, weighing his response. David had always been protective of his younger sister, even when they were children. Jessica was the impulsive one, the dreamer who got into scrapes, while David was the responsible older brother who helped clean up the messes. "What kind of something?" I took a deep breath, staring out my kitchen window at the garden I'd been neglecting lately. The roses needed deadheading, and weeds were creeping into the flower beds. Everything felt like it was falling apart. "I think she's been lying to my friends about me, saying things that aren't true, causing problems between us. I just got off the phone with Carol, and the things she thinks I said. David, I would never say those things about people I care about." The silence stretched longer this time. When David finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured in that way he had when he was trying to process difficult information. "Are you sure? I mean, could there have been some kind of misunderstanding?" "That's what I thought at first, but the pattern is too clear, too specific. She's been systematically damaging my relationships, and I can't figure out why." "I'll be home in an hour," he said simply. While I waited for David, I found myself pacing through the house, seeing it with new eyes. Jessica's belongings were scattered throughout the living room, her laptop on the coffee table, her books stacked on the end table, her coffee mug from this morning still sitting on the kitchen counter. For months, I'd been happy to have these signs of her presence, grateful that my adult daughter wanted to spend time with me during this transitional period in her life. Now, those same objects felt like evidence of an invasion I hadn't recognized. I settled into my favorite armchair, the one by the front window where I used to read to both David and Jessica when they were small. The afternoon light was slanting through the blinds, creating patterns on the hardwood floor that reminded me of countless other afternoons spent in this same spot, worrying about one thing or another related to my children. But I'd never imagined worrying about this. When David's car pulled into the driveway, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Through the window, I watched him walk up the front path, his shoulders set in that determined way that meant he was ready to tackle whatever problem lay ahead. At 32, he still had that same focused expression he'd worn as a child when he was trying to solve a puzzle or fix something that was broken. "Okay," he said as he came through the front door, loosening his tie and settling onto the couch across from me. "Tell me everything." I walked him through the whole situation, the gradual cooling of my friendships, the canceled plans, the awkward encounters at the grocery store, and finally, my conversation with Carol. David listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. "The thing is," I concluded, "Jessica always seemed to know things about my friends that I hadn't shared with her. And she was always nearby when I was on the phone with them." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood. He'd always done that when he was trying to work through a difficult problem. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you, and I'm not sure how you're going to take it." My heart sank. The way he said it, with that careful tone, made me realize that whatever was coming would be worse than what I'd already discovered. "Last month, when I was here for dinner, I answered your phone when you were in the bathroom. It was Linda, and she seemed upset." She asked me to tell you that she didn't appreciate what you'd said about her divorce, and that maybe you should focus on your own problems before judging other people's marriages. I stared at him, feeling the blood drain from my face. I never said anything about Linda's divorce. I've been nothing but supportive. I know that. That's why I didn't mention it to you at the time. I figured there had been some kind of misunderstanding, and I didn't want to upset you over nothing. But now, with what you're telling me, you think Jessica was behind that too? David nodded slowly. And there's more. A couple of weeks ago, Jessica called me. She was crying, saying she was worried about you because you'd been making mean comments about your friends, and she didn't know what to do. She asked me not to say anything because she didn't want to embarrass you. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what David was telling me. Not only had Jessica been lying to my friends about me, but she'd also been manipulating David, positioning herself as the concerned daughter, worried about her mother's declining social skills. Why would she do this? I whispered. David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression a mixture of sadness and something that looked almost like fear. Mom, I think I might know why, but you're not going to like what I have to tell you. I felt my stomach clench at the dread in David's voice. The afternoon light filtering through the living room windows seemed to dim, casting longer shadows across the hardwood floor. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of children playing, their laughter a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere that had settled between us. Just tell me, I said, though every instinct screamed that I didn't want to know. David shifted uncomfortably on the couch, his hands clasping and unclasping in his lap. Do you remember when Jessica first moved back in with you? What was happening in her life at that time? I thought back to 6 months ago, when my daughter had appeared on my doorstep with 2 suitcases and red-rimmed eyes. She'd broken up with Marcus. She said she needed time to figure things out, and I was happy to have her home. It had been so long since we'd lived under the same roof. Right. And do you remember how you were spending your time then? I don't understand what you're getting at. But even as I said it, pieces were starting to click together in my mind, forming a picture I desperately didn't want to see. David leaned back against the couch cushions, his expression pained. Mom, you were out almost every night? Book club on Tuesdays, dinner with Carol on Thursdays, weekend trips with Linda, coffee dates with Susan. You were happier than I'd seen you in years. You kept telling me how wonderful it was to have such good friends, how full your social calendar was. The words hit me like a physical blow. I remembered those first few weeks after Jessica moved in. I had been excited to share my life with her, to show her the community I'd built for myself. I'd chattered endlessly about my plans, introduced her to my friends when they picked me up for outings, even invited them over for dinner a few times. You think she was jealous? I said quietly. I think Jessica came home expecting to have your full attention. And instead, she found that you had a whole life that didn't revolve around her. And I think that scared her. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to pace, to do something with the nervous energy that was building inside me. The Persian rug beneath my feet, a gift from Carol after one of her trips abroad, suddenly felt like a mockery. How many of my friendships had Jessica systematically destroyed while I remained oblivious? But David, the things she said to them, the lies she told, some of them were so specific, so cruel. Where would she even get those ideas? David's face darkened. I've been thinking about that too. Jessica has always been good at reading people, at figuring out their insecurities. Remember when she was in high school How she could manipulate her teachers into giving her extensions, or convince you to let her stay out late by saying exactly what you wanted to hear? I did remember. At the time, I'd been impressed by Jessica's social skills, her ability to navigate different personalities. I'd never considered that those same skills could be weaponized. She would have watched your friends, listened to your conversations with them, picked up on their vulnerabilities. Linda's insecurity about her divorce, Carol's sensitivity about her weight, Susan's worry about being seen as boring. Jessica would have cataloged all of it. The pacing wasn't helping. I sank back into my chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 4 o'clock, its deep tones reverberating through the quiet house. "There's something else, isn't there?" I asked, recognizing the hesitation in David's posture. He nodded reluctantly. 2 weeks ago, Jessica called me again. This time she said she was worried about you being lonely, that your friends weren't good influences, and that maybe it would be better if it was just the two of you. She said you'd told her you were happier at home anyway, that going out had become a chore. I never said that. I know. But Mom, the way she said it, the concern in her voice, it was so convincing. If I hadn't heard Linda's message that day, if you hadn't told me about Carol's revelation, I might have believed her completely. I felt a chill run down my spine as the full scope of Jessica's manipulation became clear. She hadn't just been sabotaging my friendships. She'd been preparing David for the aftermath, making sure that when I inevitably became isolated and dependent on her, it would seem like the natural result of my own social failures. "She's been planning this," I whispered. David's expression was grim. "It looks that way." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelation settling between us. I could hear the house settling around us, the familiar creaks and sighs of a home I'd lived in for 20 years. But now it felt different, tainted by the knowledge of what had been happening under my own roof. "David," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "What am I supposed to do now? How do I confront her about this? And even if I do, how do I fix what she's broken?" Before David could answer, I heard the familiar sound of Jessica's car pulling into the driveway, her engine cutting off with its distinctive rattling cough. We both froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. "She's home early," David murmured. Through the front window, I could see Jessica gathering her purse and a shopping bag from the passenger seat. In a few moments, she would walk through that door with her usual bright smile, asking about my day, perhaps mentioning that she'd picked up ingredients for my favorite dinner. The same caring, attentive daughter who had systematically destroyed the relationships I treasured most. "What do I do?" I asked David urgently, hearing Jessica's footsteps on the front porch. David's face was pale, but his voice was steady. "We need to be smart about this, Mom. If she's been this calculating, we can't just confront her directly. She'll find a way to turn it around, make you doubt what you know." The sound of Jessica's key in the lock made us both jump. David grabbed my hand quickly. "Don't let on that we know anything yet. We need to figure out exactly how we're going to handle this first." The front door opened, and Jessica's cheerful voice called out, "Mom, I'm home. I picked up those tomatoes you wanted for the salad tonight." I looked at David, my heart pounding, knowing that everything was about to change. I forced my face into what I hoped was a normal expression as Jessica's footsteps approached the living room. My heart was hammering so hard, I was certain she would hear it, and I found myself gripping the arm of my chair with white knuckles. "Hi, sweetheart," I managed, my voice sounding strangely high to my own ears. "How was your day?" Jessica appeared in the doorway, looking exactly as she always did after a day out. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her makeup still perfectly applied despite the afternoon heat. She was wearing the blue sundress I'd complimented her on just last week, and she carried herself with that same confident grace that had always made me so proud. But now, looking at her, all I could think about was the calculated cruelty behind her actions. How had I never noticed the disconnect between her caring words and the systematic destruction of my relationships? How had I been so blind? "Oh, it was good," Jessica said, settling into her usual spot on the couch across from me. "I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store. She asked about you, actually. Said she hadn't seen you at the community center lately." The casual way she mentioned it made my stomach turn. Was this another manipulation? Was she testing to see if I suspected anything? I caught David's eye and saw him tense slightly. "I've been busy," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. Jessica tilted her head with that concerned expression I now recognized as performed rather than genuine. "Mom, you know I worry about you isolating yourself. It's not healthy to spend so much time alone." The irony was so thick I nearly choked on it. Here she was, expressing concern about my isolation while being the very architect of it. I felt a surge of anger so intense it took my breath away, but David's earlier words echoed in my mind. We needed to be smart about this. "I'm not alone," I said, gesturing toward David. "I have my family." "Of course," Jessica said quickly, but I caught something in her expression. A flash of annoyance, maybe, or calculation. "But friends are important too. I just think maybe you've been making some poor choices lately about who to trust." David shifted forward in his chair. "What do you mean by that, Jess?" Jessica's attention turned to her brother, and I watched her face transform into an expression of reluctant concern. It was masterful, really. If I hadn't known what I now knew, I would have been completely convinced by her performance. "Well, I hate to say it, but some of Mom's friends have been saying some pretty hurtful things. I've been trying to protect her from it, but maybe I should have been more direct." "Such as?" David's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath. "Linda, for instance. She's been telling people that Mom is becoming paranoid and difficult to be around. And Carol—" Jessica paused, as if the words pained her. "Carol actually told someone at the book club that she thinks Mom might be having some kind of mental health crisis." The lies rolled off her tongue so smoothly, with just the right amount of hesitation and apparent reluctance. I found myself marveling at her skill, even as I felt sick to my stomach. How long had she been perfecting this act? "That's interesting," David said slowly, "because I talked to Carol myself, and she said something very different." For just a moment, Jessica's mask slipped. I saw a flicker of something cold and calculating cross her features before the concerned daughter expression snapped back into place. "Oh, David," she said with a small, sad smile. "Carol would never say those things to your face. She's too polite for that. But I've heard her talking to others." "When?" David pressed. "Where exactly did you hear this?" Jessica's eyes darted between us, and I could practically see her mind working, calculating her response. "At the coffee shop downtown. She was talking to that woman from her yoga class. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but when I heard Mom's name—" Another lie, delivered with perfect believability. I wondered how many others there had been over the months. How many times had I accepted her version of events without question, trusting my daughter's word over my own instincts? "Jessica," I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." She turned to me with that same concerned expression, but now I could see the wariness lurking beneath it. Of course, Mom. You can ask me anything. Have you ever spoken to any of my friends about me? About concerns you might have about my behavior or mental state? The question hung in the air between us. I watched Jessica's face carefully, looking for any crack in her composure. For a long moment, she was completely still, and I could see her weighing her options. Mom, she said finally, her voice soft and hurt. Why would you ask me something like that? Of course, I've never said anything negative about you to anyone. The lie was so blatant, so directly contradicted by what Carol had told me, that I felt something shift inside me. The last vestiges of doubt, the part of me that had been desperately hoping this was all some terrible misunderstanding, finally crumbled away. My daughter had been systematically destroying my friendships, and now she was lying directly to my face about it. I see, I said quietly. David was watching both of us intently, and I could see the anger building in his expression as he witnessed Jessica's deception firsthand. You know what's funny, Jess? He said conversationally. I had a very different conversation with Carol yesterday. She told me some interesting things about a phone call she received from you. Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. The mask of concern fell away, replaced by something I'd never seen on my daughter's face before. Something cold and calculating and utterly without remorse. I don't know what you think you know, she said, her voice taking on a hard edge I'd never heard before. But you're making a mistake. The silence that followed Jessica's words was deafening. I stared at my daughter, this person I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, and felt like I was looking at a stranger. The cold calculation in her eyes, the complete absence of shame or remorse, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. My mind raced through years of memories, suddenly seeing them through this new lens. How many times had Jessica been the one to tell me about a friend's supposed slight? How many social invitations had mysteriously dried up after she'd expressed concern about my fragile state following the divorce? I felt sick thinking about all the times I'd confided in her about feeling isolated, only to have her comfort me while secretly orchestrating that very isolation. What mistake would that be exactly? David asked, his voice steady, but with an underlying steel I recognized from our childhood. He'd used that same tone when confronting playground bullies who picked on smaller kids. Jessica's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she might continue the charade, but something in David's expression seemed to convince her otherwise. When she spoke again, her voice was entirely different from the concerned, loving tone she'd been using moments before. You wouldn't understand, she said flatly. Neither of you would understand what it's been like watching Mom make the same mistakes over and over again. The words hit me like a physical blow. What mistakes? I managed to ask, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Jessica turned to face me fully, and I saw something in her expression that made my stomach clench with dread. It wasn't anger exactly. It was disappointment. Disgust, even. Do you really want me to list them? She asked. The way you threw yourself at every friend after Dad left, desperate for someone to fill that void? The way you overshared about your personal life, making everyone uncomfortable? The way you clung to people who were just being polite? Each word was carefully chosen, designed to wound. And they did wound, because buried in the cruelty was just enough truth to make me question myself. Had I been too eager for connection after the divorce? Had I shared too much, tried too hard? But then I remembered Carol's words about Jessica's phone call, the calculated way my daughter had planted seeds of doubt about my mental stability. This wasn't tough love or legitimate concern. This was something else entirely. So, you decided to handle it for me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You decided to drive away anyone who might care about me because you thought you knew better. I was protecting you, Jessica shot back, but there was no conviction in her voice now. I was protecting you from getting hurt when they inevitably got tired of your neediness. David made a sound of disgust. That's not protection, Jess. That's control. And it's cruel. Jessica whirled on him. Don't you dare lecture me about what's cruel. You disappeared to Chicago right after the divorce. You left me to deal with Mom's breakdown, to pick up the pieces when she could barely function. Where were you when she was crying every night for months? The accusation hung in the air, and I saw David flinch. There was truth in what Jessica said, and we all knew it. He had left for Chicago shortly after my divorce was finalized, taking a job that conveniently put several hundred miles between him and the messy aftermath of my failed marriage. But I also saw something else in Jessica's outburst. Pain. Real, raw pain that she'd been carrying for years. My brilliant, accomplished daughter, who'd always seemed so put together, so capable of handling anything life threw at her. Jessica, I said softly, and she turned back to me with tears now threatening to spill over. Honey, I never asked you to take care of me like that. You didn't have to ask, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Someone had to. Someone had to make sure you didn't completely fall apart. The pieces were starting to come together now, forming a picture that was more complex than simple malice. My daughter hadn't been trying to hurt me, not exactly. In her mind, she'd been protecting me from further pain, even if her methods were deeply misguided and ultimately harmful. But that wasn't your job, I said, moving closer to her. That was never your job, sweetheart. Then whose job was it? Jessica demanded, gesturing toward David. His? Because he was nowhere to be found. Dad's? He'd already made it clear he was done with all of us. David's face had gone pale, and I could see the guilt written across his features. Jess, I know I should have been here more, but that doesn't justify what you've been doing to Mom's friendships. Doesn't it? Jessica's voice was getting louder now, years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. Do you have any idea what it was like watching her get excited about some new friend, only to see that friend gradually pull away because Mom was too much, too needy, too broken? So, you decided to speed up the process, I said, understanding dawning. You decided to make it happen on your terms, so you could control when and how I got hurt. Jessica's silence was answer enough. The room felt heavy with the weight of years of misunderstanding and misdirected love. My daughter had been trying to protect me, but in doing so, she'd robbed me of the chance to heal naturally, to learn from my mistakes, to grow into the person I was meant to become after my divorce. Carol wasn't pulling away, I said quietly. She was genuinely concerned about me because of what you told her. She cared enough to worry. For the first time since this conversation began, Jessica looked uncertain. She would have, eventually, she said, but the conviction was gone from her voice. Maybe, I admitted, or maybe she would have become a real friend. Maybe we would have figured out how to navigate a healthy relationship together. But now we'll never know, will we? The question hung between us, and I watched my daughter's face crumble as the full weight of what she'd done began to sink in. David cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over us. Jess, I need to say something. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from when he was little and struggling with something difficult. You're right that I wasn't here enough. After the divorce, I thought giving Mom space was the right thing to do. But I can see now that I left you to carry a burden that should have been shared. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, still standing near the window like she might bolt at any moment. It doesn't matter now. It does matter, David insisted, moving to sit on the edge of the coffee table so he could face both of us. Because you've been operating under the assumption that Mom couldn't handle her own life, and that's not fair to either of you. I watched my children navigate this moment, seeing them not as the adults they'd become, but as the scared kids they'd been when their father and I had torn their world apart. Jessica had been 16 when we divorced, David already in college, but still dependent on us for so much. We'd all been so focused on our own pain that we'd missed how they were processing theirs. Your father leaving wasn't your fault, I said to Jessica, and it wasn't your responsibility to fix what it broke in me. But someone had to, Jessica said again, though her voice was smaller now. You were so sad all the time, Mom, and when you'd make a new friend, you'd light up for a while. But then something would always go wrong, and you'd be even sadder than before. The truth of her observation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. Those first few years after the divorce, I had been fragile. I had attached too quickly to new friendships, probably expecting them to fill voids they were never meant to fill. But that was part of healing, part of learning who I was as a single person again. So you decided to control the timeline, I said, understanding more clearly now. Better to end things quickly and cleanly than watch me get my hopes up and get hurt later. Jessica nodded miserably. I thought I was being kind, like ripping off a bandage. David shook his head. But that's not how relationships work, Jess. Mom needed to learn how to navigate friendships again, and you took that choice away from her? I was protecting her, Jessica said, but the defensiveness was fading, replaced by something that looked like dawning horror at what she'd actually done. You were protecting yourself, I said gently, and Jessica's head snapped up to look at me. You were protecting yourself from watching me struggle and potentially fail. But honey, struggling is how we grow. Failing is how we learn what works and what doesn't. The silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt different. Less charged, more contemplative. I could see Jessica working through the implications of what we'd discussed, her face cycling through emotions as she began to see her actions from a different perspective. Carol really wasn't going to abandon you? Jessica asked finally, her voice very small. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe she would have, eventually. Maybe we would have had a falling out over something else. Or maybe we would have just drifted apart naturally. But Jessica, that would have been okay. That's how some friendships go, and it doesn't mean I'm broken or unlovable. David leaned forward. And even if it had ended badly, Mom would have survived it. She's stronger than you think she is. Jessica looked at me with fresh eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I never thought about it that way. I just saw you hurting and wanted to make it stop. I know you did, I said, my heart breaking a little for the teenager who had taken on such an impossible task. But pain isn't always something that needs to be prevented, sweetheart. Sometimes it's something that needs to be experienced so we can come out the other side. The room fell quiet again as we all absorbed the weight of this revelation. Years of misguided protection. Years of missed opportunities for genuine connection. Years of Jessica carrying a burden that was never hers to bear. But underneath the sadness, I could feel something else emerging. Understanding. the possibility of healing, the chance to move forward differently. "So what happens now?" Jessica asked, and I could hear both hope and fear in her voice. "Now we figure out how to fix this," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't entirely sure what that would look like. The damage to my friendship with Carol felt extensive, built on months of carefully constructed lies. But Jessica was looking at me with such desperate hope that I knew we had to try. "Do you think Carol will forgive me?" Jessica asked. "Will she forgive us?" Before I could answer, David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression changed in a way that made my stomach drop. "What is it?" I asked. David looked up at us, his face pale. "It's from Carol. She says she needs to talk to you, Mom. Tonight. She says it's urgent and it can't wait." My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at David's phone screen. The words seemed to blur together, but their meaning was crystal clear. Carol knew something was wrong, and she was ready to confront it head on. "What does the message say exactly?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David cleared his throat and read aloud. "Margaret, I know it's late, but I need to see you tonight. Something isn't adding up about our last few conversations, and I think we need to clear the air. I'm coming over in 20 minutes. The room fell into stunned silence. Jessica's face had gone completely white, and I could see her hands trembling in her lap. All the progress we'd made in our conversation, all the understanding we'd built, suddenly felt fragile in the face of this immediate reckoning. "She knows," Jessica whispered, her voice cracking. "She figured it out." My mind raced through the possibilities. Carol was sharp, always had been. If she'd been paying attention to the inconsistencies in what I'd been telling her, the stories that didn't quite line up, the sudden changes in my behavior toward her, she would have started putting pieces together. And Carol wasn't the type to let things fester. When she had questions, she asked them directly. "Mom, what are you going to do?" David asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice. I looked at Jessica, who was staring at me with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. This was it. The moment of truth that we'd been building toward without realizing it. All of Jessica's careful manipulations, all of my confused hurt and withdrawal from Carol, all of the damage that had been done to a friendship I truly valued, it was all about to come to light. "I'm going to tell her the truth," I said finally, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "All of it." Jessica made a small, wounded sound. "She's going to hate me. She's going to think I'm some kind of psychopath." "No, she won't," I said, though I wasn't entirely certain. Carol had a good heart, but she also had boundaries, and what Jessica had done was a significant violation of trust. "But even if she's angry, even if she needs time to process this, we still have to tell her the truth. She deserves that." David nodded slowly. "Do you want us to be here when she comes? Or would it be better if you talked to her alone first?" I considered this carefully. Part of me wanted to handle this conversation privately, to try to salvage what I could of my friendship with Carol without exposing Jessica to the full force of Carol's potential anger. But another part of me knew that would be just another form of protection that Jessica didn't need. "I think you should both be here," I said. "This affects all of us, and Jessica needs to face the consequences of her actions directly. That's part of taking responsibility." Jessica swallowed hard, but nodded. "Okay, I can do that. I want to do that." Looking at my daughter in that moment, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride that she was willing to face this difficult conversation, sadness for the pain she was about to experience, and a deep, abiding love for the young woman who had tried so hard to protect me that she'd nearly destroyed something precious in the process. What if she never forgives us? Jessica asked quietly. Then we'll have to live with that, I said, and the words hurt even as I spoke them. But Jessica, even if Carol can't forgive what happened, this is still the right thing to do. We can't build anything real on a foundation of lies. David moved closer to Jessica on the couch, and I saw him take her hand. The gesture was small but significant, a show of sibling solidarity that warmed my heart despite the circumstances. We'll get through this together, he said simply. I walked to the window and peered out into the darkness, looking for Carol's headlights. My palms were sweating, and I felt like I might throw up, but underneath the fear was something else. Relief, maybe. The exhausting weight of carrying Jessica's deception was finally going to be lifted. What exactly am I going to say? I wondered aloud, more to myself than to David and Jessica. Start with the truth, David suggested. Tell her what really happened from the beginning. But how do I explain why I went along with it? How do I make her understand that I wasn't trying to hurt her? Jessica spoke up from the couch, her voice small but determined. You tell her it was my fault. You tell her that I lied to you and that you believed me because you trusted me. You tell her that you were trying to protect yourself based on information you thought was true. I turned back to look at my daughter, seeing the resolve in her face despite her obvious fear. Jessica, I'm not going to throw you under the bus. You're not throwing me under the bus if it's the truth, she replied. I did this. I made these choices, and I need to own that. The sound of a car door slamming outside made us all freeze. Carol was here. She's early, David observed unnecessarily. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure they could all hear it. In a few minutes, I was going to have to look my friend in the eye and admit that I'd been deceiving her for months, that my own daughter had been systematically undermining our friendship, and that I'd been too blind, too damaged by my own insecurities to see what was happening. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, in the quiet house. I'll get it, I said, but my feet felt like they were made of lead. As I walked toward the front door, I could feel David and Jessica watching me. The weight of their expectations, their hopes, their fears pressed down on my shoulders. But more than that, I could feel the weight of my own choices, my own responsibility in how this situation had unfolded. I reached for the doorknob, took a deep breath, and prepared to face the consequences of months of deception and misunderstanding. Whatever happened next, there would be no more lies between Carol and me. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time, and I realized that Carol's patience was running out. I opened the door to find Carol standing on my front porch, her expression unreadable in the dim light from the porch fixture. She looked tired, and there was something guarded in her posture that made my stomach clench even tighter. Hi, I said, my voice coming out smaller than I'd intended. Hi. She stepped inside without her usual warmth, and I noticed she didn't give me the quick hug she normally would. The absence of that small gesture felt like a chasm between us. As we walked toward the living room, I could feel every step echoing in my chest. My hands were trembling, and I shoved them into my pockets to hide it. This was Carol, my friend for over a decade, the person who'd been there through my divorce, through Jessica's difficult middle school years, through countless late-night conversations about everything and nothing. How had we gotten to this place where I was afraid to look her in the eye? When we entered the living room, David stood up from his chair, offering Carol a polite nod. Jessica remained on the couch, but I noticed she sat up straighter, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like we were all holding our breath. "Carol, thank you for coming," I began, then immediately felt foolish. Thank you for coming? As if this were a dinner party instead of what might be the end of our friendship. Carol settled into the armchair across from Jessica, her movements careful and deliberate. "You said it was important." Something about Jessica wanting to tell me something? I glanced at my daughter, who gave me the slightest nod. The plan had been for Jessica to explain everything herself, but looking at Carol's guarded expression, I realized I couldn't put that burden entirely on my 15-year-old daughter, no matter how ready she claimed to be. "Actually," I said, moving to stand behind the couch where I could see everyone, "we both need to tell you something, and I need to start by saying that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Carol." Carol's eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Sorry for what?" The words stuck in my throat. How do you tell someone you've been lying to them for months? How do you explain that your own insecurities and damaged trust had made you complicit in hurting them? "The things I said about you," I managed finally. "The way I've been treating you, the distance, the coldness. It was all based on lies." "What lies?" Carol's voice was sharp now, alert. I looked at Jessica, who was staring down at her hands. Her whole body was tense, like she was bracing for impact. David cleared his throat softly, a gentle reminder that he was there, that I wasn't alone in this. "Jessica told me things," I continued, each word feeling like I was pulling it from somewhere deep and painful inside myself. "About conversations she said you'd had with her." "About things you supposedly said about me, about my parenting, about my life choices." Carol's gaze shifted to Jessica, then back to me. "What kinds of things?" This was the moment, the point of no return. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool evening air. "She told me you said I was a bad mother, that you thought I was too lenient with her, that you were worried about how I was raising her. She said you told her that you thought I was making poor choices, that you were concerned about my judgment." Carol's face went through a series of expressions, confusion giving way to something that looked like hurt, then anger. "I never said any of those things. Not to Jessica, not to anyone." "I know that now," I said quickly. But at the time, I believed her. And it fed into all my own insecurities, all my fears about whether I was doing right by Jessica, whether I was failing her the way I felt like I'd failed at my marriage. Jessica finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lied." Carol turned to look at her fully now, and I saw something in my friend's face that made me want to step between them, to protect my daughter, even as I knew she needed to face the consequences of what she'd done. "You lied about what, exactly?" Carol's voice was controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath it. Jessica lifted her head, and I was surprised to see tears streaming down her face. "About everything." "About conversations we never had, about things you never said. I made it all up." The silence that followed felt endless. Carol stared at Jessica, then at me, then back at Jessica. I could see her processing this information, trying to reconcile it with months of my increasingly cold behavior. "Why?" Carol asked finally. It was the question I'd been dreading, because I knew the answer would hurt Carol even more than the lies themselves. Jessica wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a streak across her cheek. The tears kept coming, but she forced herself to look at Carol directly. "Because I wanted Mom to myself," she said, her voice cracking. after the divorce, it felt like we were finally close again. Like it was just us, against the world. But then you were always there. And she was always talking about you and going out with you. And I felt like I was losing her all over again. Carol's expression softened slightly, though the hurt was still visible in her eyes. So, you decided to destroy our friendship? I didn't think it would work, Jessica said quickly. At first, I just said one little thing about how you asked me if Mom was dating anyone. Which you did ask, but you were just being friendly. I made it sound like you were being nosy and judgmental. And Mom got this look on her face, like she was hurt, and I realized how easy it would be to make her doubt you. I felt sick listening to this, listening. The memory of that conversation was vivid now. I'd come home from coffee with Carol, and Jessica had casually mentioned Carol's question about my dating life. The way Jessica had presented it, with a slight eye roll and a comment about how Carol seemed really interested in my personal business, had planted the first seed of doubt. Each time I saw it working, I did a little more, Jessica continued. I'd wait until Mom seemed stressed or tired, and then I'd mention something you supposedly said. I knew exactly what would hurt her most. Anything about her parenting, about whether she was doing okay after the divorce. She's so worried about messing up, about not being good enough. David, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke up. Jessica, that's incredibly manipulative. Do you understand that? She nodded miserably. I know. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. Every time Mom chose to stay home with me instead of going out with Carol, or when she'd get that distant look when Carol called, I felt like I was winning her back, like I was protecting what we had. Carol looked at me, and I saw years of friendship in her eyes. All the times we'd supported each other through difficult moments, all the laughter we'd shared, all the trust I'd thrown away based on my daughter's lies. How long has this been going on? Carol asked. About 8 months, I admitted, since around Jessica's birthday. 8 months, Carol repeated slowly. 8 months of you thinking I was talking behind your back, judging you, criticizing your parenting. No wonder you've been so cold. The weight of what I'd lost hit me then. 8 months of friendship, gone. 8 months of support I could have had. Conversations we could have shared. Moments of connection I'd deliberately avoided because I thought my best friend was secretly undermining me. I'm so sorry, I said, and my voice broke. Carol, I'm so incredibly sorry. I should have talked to you directly. I should have trusted our friendship more than I trusted my own insecurities. Jessica was crying harder now, the kind of sobbing that comes from deep shame and regret. I ruined everything, she said. I ruined your friendship because I was selfish and scared. David moved closer to Jessica, not quite touching her, but close enough that she could feel his presence. You made a serious mistake, he said gently. But mistakes can be fixed if you're willing to do the work. Carol stood up from the porch step where she'd been sitting and walked a few paces away, her back to us. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself carefully, as if she might fall apart if she relaxed even slightly. When she turned back around, her face was composed but serious. I need to understand something, she said, looking directly at Jessica. Did you ever think about how this was affecting your mother? How much pain you were causing her by making her think she was losing her closest friend? Jessica's face crumpled. I saw how sad she was, but I told myself it was better than her replacing me with you. I was so afraid that if she got too close to anyone else, she wouldn't need me anymore. Need you? I said, startled. Jessica, you're my daughter. No friendship, no relationship, nothing could ever change that. You're not replaceable. But Dad replaced me, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. He has his new life, his new family he's planning, and I barely see him. And I kept thinking, what if you do the same thing? What if you find people you like better than me? The pieces were falling into place now, the deeper fear beneath Jessica's actions. This wasn't just about jealousy or wanting attention. It was about a fundamental terror of abandonment, of being left behind the way she felt her father had left her behind. David cleared his throat. Jessica, your dad's choices don't determine your worth, and they definitely don't predict how your mom will treat you. I know that now, Jessica said, but I didn't know how to stop. Every lie made the next one necessary. I had to keep making Carol sound worse so Mom wouldn't start doubting me instead. Carol sat back down, closer to Jessica this time. What you did was wrong, she said firmly. You hurt your mother, and you hurt me. You damaged a friendship that meant a lot to both of us. Jessica nodded, unable to speak. But, Carol continued, I can see why you were scared. That doesn't excuse what you did, but I can understand the fear behind it. I looked at Carol with such gratitude. Even in her hurt and anger, she was trying to help Jessica understand the impact of her actions without destroying her completely. The question now, Carol said, looking at me, is where we go from here. Can we rebuild what was broken? Can we trust each other again? Before I could answer, Jessica spoke up. There's more, she said quietly. My heart sank. More what? More lies, not just about Carol. Jessica's voice was barely audible. About other people, too. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the room spinning slightly as I tried to process what Jessica had just admitted. More lies. More people whose relationships with me had been poisoned by my daughter's manipulation. Who else? I managed to ask, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Jessica looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. Remember when you stopped talking to Mrs. Henderson from down the street? And when you had that falling out with your book club? My mouth went dry. Mrs. Henderson had been such a sweet neighbor, always bringing over extra vegetables from her garden. And the book club? I'd been so hurt when they seemed to turn cold toward me, eventually leading to me quietly dropping out. I'd spent months wondering what I'd done wrong. What did you tell them? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. I told Mrs. Henderson that you complained about her dog barking and called her annoying. And I told some of the book club ladies that you said their book choices were stupid and that you thought they were all pretentious. Carol inhaled sharply. Jessica, how many people are we talking about here? I don't know exactly, Jessica whispered. Maybe 6 or 7 over the past year? Anyone who seemed like they were getting too close to Mom, or who Mom seemed to really like spending time with? David leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. Jessica, do you understand the scope of what you've done? You've systematically isolated your mother from her support network. You've damaged relationships that took years to build. I felt like I was drowning. All those times I'd wondered why friendships seemed to fizzle out, why people grew distant, why I felt so alone. It hadn't been my imagination or my social awkwardness. It had been my own daughter, methodically cutting me off from connections with other people. I'm so sorry, Mom, Jessica said, tears streaming down her face now. I know it was horrible. I know I hurt you. But I was so scared of losing you. But you were losing me anyway, I said, the realization hitting me as I spoke. Don't you see? By isolating me, by making me doubt myself and wonder what was wrong with me. You were pushing me away from everyone, including you. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, suspicious, paranoid, lonely. Carol reached over and squeezed my hand. That's exactly what happened. I watched you withdraw more and more, and I couldn't understand why. Now I know it wasn't your choice. The full weight of what I'd lost was settling over me. Years of potential friendships, support systems, connections with my community, all sacrificed to feed Jessica's fear of abandonment. The irony was devastating. I need some air, I said, standing up abruptly. I walked to the sliding door that led to our small backyard and stepped outside, breathing deeply in the cool evening air. David followed me out. Are you okay? I don't know, I said honestly. I feel like I don't know anything anymore. How do I even begin to fix this? How do I reach out to people and explain that my teenage daughter has been sabotaging my relationships? How do I rebuild trust with people I may have inadvertently hurt? One conversation at a time, David said simply, starting with the people who matter most to you. Through the glass door, I could see Carol talking quietly with Jessica, both of them looking serious but not hostile. Even after everything, Carol was still here, still trying to help us work through this mess. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, I said to David. All the times Jessica seemed almost pleased when a friendship ended, or when she'd make little comments that seemed supportive but were actually reinforcing my doubts about people. She's smart, David said, and she was motivated by genuine fear. That's a powerful combination. But Mom, she told the truth tonight. That took courage. I nodded, knowing he was right but still feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the deception. I just feel so foolish. How did I not see what was happening? Because you trusted your daughter and you wanted to believe the best of her. That's not foolish. That's being a good mother. We went back inside to find Carol and Jessica in what looked like an intense but productive conversation. I was just explaining to Jessica, Carol said when she saw us, that rebuilding trust is going to take time and consistent actions, not just apologies. Jessica nodded earnestly. I want to make this right, Mom. I want to help fix what I broke. I know it won't be easy, and I know some people might not forgive me, but I want to try. Looking at my daughter, really looking at her, I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, but also something else I hadn't noticed before. Relief. The burden of carrying all those lies, of constantly manipulating situations and managing her deceptions, must have been exhausting. We'll figure it out together, I said finally. But Jessica, this can never happen again. And you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions, even if that means some relationships can't be repaired. I understand, she said quietly. Carol stood up, smoothing down her shirt. I should probably head home. This has been a lot to process. My heart clenched. Carol, I hope this doesn't mean our friendship is over, she said firmly. But it does mean we need to take things slowly. I need time to process my feelings about all of this, and you two need time to work through your family issues. After Carol left, the house felt different somehow. Lighter, but also more fragile, like we were all walking on new ground that hadn't been tested yet. Over the next few weeks, Jessica and I began the difficult work of addressing the damage she'd caused. Together, we reached out to Mrs. Henderson, who was hurt but ultimately understanding. The book club was harder. Some members were willing to hear us out. Others weren't ready to forgive. But slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild. And more importantly, Jessica and I started having the deeper conversations we should have been having all along about her fears, her relationship with her father, and what security really meant in our family. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in months, I felt like we were walking it together, in honesty, rather than in the shadows of lies and manipulation.